Index Global. In conversation with Arc Daily and Design Boom, powered by Woodvisor.
My name is Claire Brodka. I'm here with Index Global at Milan Design Week with a couple of fabulous guests. We are discussing designing for the senses, so I'm very excited. I would love to have just each of you quickly introduce yourselves, and then we can start with the questions. Let's start with you and work our way to the right.
I'm architect Indrajit Kembavi from Bangalore, India. It's a pleasure being here with Claire for discussing on a very interesting subject today at Milan, and looking forward for the session to get rolling.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Manish Gulati. I work for a brand, Mofa Studio in Delhi, and equally excited. Claire?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm architect Sanjay Singh, and I represent Arcop Associates. It's a very design-invested firm based out of North India. Happy to be here.
I'm Siddharth Talwar. I'm from Delhi by the name of Siddharth Talwar Architecture and Design. I run my practice doing different scale of projects, and again very excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm excited to have so many different minds to pick, so I think it'll make for a very interesting session. We are talking about designing for the senses, not just in an architectural sense, but in an emotional sense, in every sense of the word. So I would love to start with the idea of, we've become, not just architecture, but as a society, I think we've become very image-focused, image-obsessed, visually obsessed. So what, in your own, practices or even just experiences or research in the last couple of years, how do we bring architecture back, I guess, to other senses rather than just the visual?
I'll go. Claire, visual seduction has always, in the human civilization, taken the precedence. Whether it's the photograph, it's the art, it's always seduced. It's always the idea of the picture-perfect postcard that we are chasing, not the imperfections. So in order to understand the other senses, it's very important to understand the imperfections and the chaos of life. To see the textures, to see the dirt, to see human life does not exist in perfections. It is imperfect. And to embrace that with the other senses, it's very important. So unfortunately, it's the screens, the technology, everything till now has just supported the visual sense. We, I guess, can't help it, the way the technology is moving. We're all stuck to our screens. But in order to understand the story of architecture, it's important to start feeling with other senses equally.
I would say, I think it's not a bad thing if the image is something which is, one of the primary senses that you're playing on, because it's actually a bit of a visual science. But I think, as long as you can create spaces, where you can create the textures, okay, you can create the feels, touch and feel, you can create sound, wherein the visual imagery is sort of motivating you to, go and test those senses. I think, that's a good sort of symbiotic relationship to have between the various senses that we talk about. We've sort of done that. We've put together more than one sense and tried to make an image which might be as you first see it more visual. But then when you experience the space, I think the other senses start coming in, and the layers start
I was going to say it's about layers,
getting more prominent. And sort of telling the story in its entirety. So I think it's not really a bad thing, to have the visual imagery, take precedence, as long as you can, sort of try to create, the other spaces come in and take their due,
right,
from the visual image.
And how do you do that? I guess was
okay. So
the idea is like, do you do that through intrigue, through like revealing, through compression and release? What are the tools?
Absolutely. So I'm sort of reminded about this project of mine which we did, which was the convention center that we did for the G20 summit in Delhi back in 2023, and we were looking at an international audience of the heads of these states who would be coming there, and we wanted to play on that. We wanted to all the senses to come together. So we were looking at this particular art installation, okay, wherein the Indian paintings had to come in, okay, and one of the easiest things to do was you just create one of these Indian painting styles, which is Madhubani, if you would know of it. Comes from hinterland of Bihar. The primarily the homemakers at home, they do it by hand, okay, but we said can we create something else here. So we started fusing the artworks from different areas, which is the marble works of Agra, there was the brass works of Muradabad, and we started layering them in a three-dimensional way, right? So that the overall installation starts speaking a different language instead of just visual, okay? And I actually saw people go nearer to that artwork and try to see that is this something which is painted, or is this actually the other art form that's crept into the whole thing. So that's what I mean when you are saying that the visual starts, but the other senses start getting stimulated in the whole experience. So that's one of the examples. I could just go on and on,
Right.
So
with that.
I feel the image is a stimulant and draws in a person to a particular space very quickly. And once you're drawn in, it's at that point of time I think the drama really starts. So drama could be something as minimal and simple, or it can be extremely dramatic and very stimulating with lot of mystique and surprise. It's about addressing a space or an element true to the context that it's placed in. And I feel so an image or a series of images, an image starts from a microcosm of a single image, and then it transits to multiple forms like a dance, which could start from a simple steps and gets on getting more advanced with time and place. So I feel end of the day, any design process is a drama, which
Right.
starts off as an image and culminates as a series of images, which stay in the mind. And the whole point is, what's the stimulus? I think the story is all in the stimulus that we are trying to evoke
Right.
in a journey.
Yeah, I like this idea of comparing it to the dramatic arc, where
Yes.
you need an entry point, and then, as you also said, it needs to unravel
But I'm
through
also,
The question is that can you make a design which is aesthetically not pleasing, but it fulfills the other senses? And that's the search which is very important. Chaos. Our cities are chaotic when you do design, and I mean, we've done a design where architecture is completely hidden by the landscape, and the landscape is it caters to every sense. So the birds come in, you've got the sounds, you've got the smells of the fruit, you've got everything, but you don't see the building at all. There is no visual. And in that aspect, whether it's the strong sense of visual, which is good or bad, doesn't matter, but you have already gone beyond the visual sense, because everything that you're creating, you're coming back to the image or the series of images, and it's still visual. So for me, and there is a beautiful museum in Milan, a museum for visually impaired, where there's no light. It's all dark. While you're eating in the darkness. While you're giving the money for a change, you can't count because you can't see. But the person who's taking that, he knows it. And it's your other senses become so strong that visual just doesn't matter. You've gone beyond it. And that's the search I'm interested in.
Actually, when we look at it,
Just give me one.
sorry.
I'd love to hear from you.
it's-
on the topic.
No, just to add to this, I think the architecture is getting now consumed, before you really inhabit it. It's just too much visual driven than the experiential part. And I think as architects, because of the scale of work, we're just too much into sorting out the skeleton of it, or probably the skin of it, that this aspect of soul gets lost. So in a context where I think you need slowness and proximity, probably to get back to the other senses. It's just not the eye, but the other senses. So adding to craft, how a hand-driven approach, how you can feel the surfaces, how the light can change your mood. I think the opportunity is where the design can be participant to slowness and proximity. How you can touch, feel, and that probably could be a stimulant to add some depth and authenticity to the design.
And the trying to understand the movement of a body through, the building.
I think it's probably also got to do, with the fact that the large percentage of people who experience space are more sort of susceptible to the visual
Of course.
than the other senses. And I was just thinking about this curious experience that I had at the Getty Center in LA. All right. There are these, cuboid boxes, and they have these, thin alleyways, and then it breaks out into a courtyard. And I was there a few years back, and I was with my family, and we were mesmerized with the kind of surfaces that were there, with that limestone, throwing the sunlight. And I spoke to my wife, and I said, can you feel the wind on your skin? Okay, because it drives the wind
Yes.
in. Okay. And she said, what are you talking about? I said, yeah, because you can feel it on your skin, okay, and you can hear the wind. And as you move out, the moment you get into the courtyard, it just disappears.
Yeah.
Right. So that's, it plays differently on different people.
For sure.
Right. And because the visuals are the most prominent one and easy to sort of decipher, I think that's why it takes the prominent position. But then, there are other senses which will come in and which will need to be, experienced really.
And I think those senses and those experiences are what stays with you.
Absolutely, like I
That's
said,
what
this
makes the
was
building memorable,
Probably 3
right?
years back, and I still remember it.
Yeah.
Exactly what is
very
important for an
vividly.
architect is not to design for the visual.
Yeah.
Is to design for absolutely non-visual and go beyond that.
I agree.
Because that's a
with you.
responsibility we have
Completely.
as
Right.
architects.
You would not really remember a fantastic single facade or a
It's-
single idea.
yeah.
You'll really remember the threshold or the corners
Yeah.
and how you navigate from a small
Well, it's-
space to a large space,
Right.
and that's how those experiences.
It's very similar. There's a beautiful quote that says, people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And it's the same with buildings.
Yeah.
So there is a very famous, philosophical thing in our country, in India, which says, "Oh Lord, lead me from unreal to the real, from darkness to light, and from death to eternity." So I feel the image starts as the unreal, and then you start going towards the real, and from darkness to light is something where I feel all the senses are elevated when you move through a space, and it becomes eternal in your mind space once you transit the particular threshold of design that comes in. So it's not about the visual or the aesthetic aspect which goes alone in the creation of things. Yes, as architects, we always try. See, we are all in a quest. I think engineering is in a quest of making things perfect, whereas design is something trying to make the perfect more beautiful and more efficient and easy to work with. And at the same time, something which motivates us to use it more and more as we go along in life. So I feel design is a tool that is an ever stimulative experience,
Right.
and I think it's what I feel causes civilizations to change
Right.
and evolve over a period of time.
Will prioritizing function, do you think, eventually lead to beauty just dying out?
I think it's the engineering thought which talks about standardization and trying to kill the design element in the language of making things easy. But whereas I feel that's something which is actually spoiling the experiential system that we have. I think probably the hotels that were designed a long time ago were very, very experiential, or shopping districts, for example, the street side shopping that we experience all over the world in its different forms. But when you look at a mall today, which is supposed to be an extremely functional, balanced thing, it's a craze which came in, and I think it's a craze that is dying out very
Right.
soon. So probably the standardization is something which stays for a very limited period of time, and it's not eternal.
It's funny because we were talking about malls in the previous panel as well, and how we can adapt them because they agree. It's something that the function is no longer there, but can it still, I guess, remain beautiful is the question.
When you say function, design is nothing without
Function.
that sense.
That's what I mean. But
And,
is it like, does the over prioritization, I guess, of function then take away the beauty, or can there be both? And how do you achieve both?
It should be both, because the moment you start responding to the rhythms of human life, the inclusivity, how people behave, how they react, how complex people are, if you're able to design for that complexity, then both exist hand in hand. And the idea for a designer is to be able to anticipate how a space would probably be reactive towards, or how people react, or vice versa. If you're just designing for a picture postcard, then obviously it does not respond to how human life would grow or progress. So you have to design for generations to come. You have to anticipate, and that's the responsibility of an architect or any designer,
Yes.
to be able to read the patterns from the history and to be able to predict the patterns for the future.
So you mentioned about complexity, that a project needs to be handed over. It needs to be handed over in a certain cost. That's also important, and how you need to do all of that. And to what Sanjay ji mentioned, like how in a couple of our cases where craft comes in, so how art becomes a protagonist, like how art can be infused at the architectural level, and how that takes over, and then that becomes a storytelling device, and you engage with the craftspeople, you engage with the imperfections of hand, and to that extent that then the experience of that space is really those 60-80 masons who have created that space. It's a story, so it's beyond.
There is no space without individual stories of people who are part of that space.
It could be very frugal, but yet it could create a
Something that can actually change the way a function works actually. So it's a lot of creativity. So
I
initially,
think this whole debate about functionality and over prioritizing it. I mean, to me, with no offense, I think it sounds very like engineering. That's the difference between an engineer and an architect, an MEP engineer or a structural engineer and an architect, right? They are supposed to be very functionality driven, right? Architects are very different, right? And I've said this many number of times that I believe that architectural education is one of the most diverse education curriculum that ever was, right? You learn to draw, you learn to design, you learn to sketch, you learn to think, poetry, literature, art and craftsmanship, and my God, it's like a whole universe, right? And you're like trying to take your knowledge about all of these and trying to put them together. So I think the functionality is absolutely important. There's no question. I think that's the starting layer. But if an architect cannot sort of manifest that functionality into spaces which are not only good to look at but good to use, like Manish said, tell stories, right? Stimulate the senses. I think then you're really not doing
That's an obvious job of an
justice and
Yes,
do your
It's a very
job.
obvious job of an architect.
But my question was, do you feel like we're on a slope where functionality, speed, everything is slowly erasing that task, or like deprioritizing that task to something where it needs to be quick, it needs to be cheap, it needs to be functioning, and the beauty aspect is
I think it's a phase. We go in cycles in history of design. We've always, right now it's a phase where efficiency, costs, capitalism, people, it's taken over.
Yes.
Eventually, and but more I interact with the younger generation, they're throwing away the idea of looking into the screen all the time. They're throwing away the idea of what has been told to them since the time they were born. And we're talking about the digital generation. They're wanting to go back to the touch, feel, go to the analog world. And analog world has become the buzzword now with the younger generation. So I feel there is hope there.
Right.
And when you have that coming in, you can anticipate that the future to come is not going to be driven only by functionality or the costs or the capitalistic sort of virtues, but it's going to be more tactile, more sensorial, more soul-oriented. People have money now. The world has money, but people are throwing away the idea of just the money, but going back to, that's why you have something like a quiet luxury. Yes. You have an example of Not a Hotel coming in which does rammed earth construction. So we've gone that cycle, and history is always repeated. It's cyclical. So I'm quite hopeful.
I really think that luxury of time, is available anymore. So the question that you asked,
It is or it isn't?
It is not available anymore. I think you have to turn things around very fast. Create your design, which is good looking, which is handling all the sensibilities and the functionality, but you have to turn it around very fast because the level of patience, I think, is gone down.
I disagree. I mean, you've got, with AI coming in, with technology coming in, you have ample amount of time to actually think now. You can think much deeper than what you could.
No, that's not what I meant. What I meant was from the client's perspective. The question that she asked was, is it, do you have the luxury of time given your, timelines and your budgets, etc., in terms of adding the layers of aesthetics and others?
One way to answer would be, you mentioned beauty, and of course, I think among this, you need to be bold.
Yeah.
What I mean to say is that all this discussion, and if I go back to Lou Barrigan's work, like where color is the beauty or the water. It could be and in today's context, it could be a different project. I agree, but somewhere down the line, that boldness, that that whim of an architect. Okay, I'm making this, and it's somewhere that is also related. Like you need to be have a vision, and you need to be stay to your idea, and that's how.
But I feel personally that like what she says is extremely relevant. The market forces are wanting to have standardization, speed, and cookie cutter design is what we call it, which could be repeatable and built really fast. The market forces are demanding that today on one side, whereas there is a movement on the other side which wants to break away from the mold and still be experimental and create something which is different. I personally feel these are two different forces or thought processes which are coexisting together, and both are a true reality in our times today. We cannot wish it away. Means honestly, when we look at a large hotel brand, for example, the hotel brand, you see a lot of similarity across. You see a lot of standardization which has come across, and it's happening. It's the truth. And there are beautiful things happening on the side which are still happening. It's not that it has stopped. So these are different forces which are coexisting today, and I think the whole idea for us as designers is trying to break away from standardization or find a better way to standardize things with a little bit of nuances of design, which is actually changing.
I'm a non-conformist optimist in this. And what you're talking about standardization was 70s, and we're seeing the result of that today as a big market force. With the future coming in, with the digital technologies coming in, with the digital fabrication happening, there is a lot more sort of non-standardization that's already happening. Take the 3D printing, take the CNC thing, take AI for example. Everything is now constituting to the point where you can individually create bespoke design, non-standardized, and still be cost-effective and time-effective.
I mean, that's a very, as you say, very optimistic way of thinking about it. And I think if more people shared that, or if clients understood that maybe in a different way, then it's I think it's an education matter, right? We were talking about policy as well in previous sessions, where policymakers, clients in a way need to be educated in order to understand the tools that are currently at place that are exponentially growing and that are maybe freeing up, as you say, some time for this beauty. I think this tension can have a beautiful release if it's if it's handled correctly, but I think it's also about you are in the end serving a client, serving a government, whichever is giving you the task at hand. And in order for the object or building to remain beautiful, you need to also get them on your side, right? And understand
that's the point that
get them to understand what it is that you are trying to do and dealing with. And then and then the object, I think, then that tension, I think, can be reduced a little bit to a point where it makes more sense.
Absolutely.
I think somewhere our practices are contextual, our beliefs are formed by the kind of context of the clients that we work with.
Surely, I agree with
We also manifest a certain kind of a belief system. Maybe I've been just in a very different space where clients have responded, they're more educated about the newer technologies, the newer ways of thinking. I guess our practices and our belief systems are formed by what we have been doing for the past few years.
No, it's not about the individual practice level. We're talking about the broader process of the construction industry or the design industry where things are happening. So individually, as I told you, there are a lot of design-driven ideas that are flowing in. But on the client side, there is also a lot of capitalist-driven ideas which are going in terms of cost, and both the things are going on parallelly. So it is something that how we can slowly mold people to come out of a capitalist thinking and trying to make the world more beautiful and much better place to live in. So this is the whole ideology that I think we as designers have to focus on.
I think we take too much of load on our shoulders as designers. I have worked with the clients who have come back and said, and they have enough money and they know how to make money out of dreams. So they're, again, the optimist thinkers who are not purely thinking about profit and loss all the time. For them, a long-term gain is also from the quality of life rather than a short-term gain of how much money they're saving in that project.
But then I think you're very lucky in your clients.
I guess
right?
so. I guess. Or I manifested in a certain way.
I feel like there's a thought.
I think it's there that those opportunities are always there. The client does give you that opportunity, and actually if you can pick up and take that pause and really not go down the the given route of how to do a project, and if you can take that pause and tell yourself, okay, hey, can I, because they are giving you that, they are looking for something extraordinary, they can give you that time, and they want something to happen. It's actually to certain extent on us also to give.
But tell me, how many clients of yours, I mean, maybe you've been very lucky, would give you an indefinite timeline to deliver the goods?
It's not about indefinite timeline.
Right.
It's about, we all are humans, even the clients are human.
Surely.
Everybody has a deep down soul that one can touch. How deep can you touch the soul of the person you're working with, or the people you're working with, or all the stakeholders you're working with? It solely depends on how you are driving the project. And I think there we have a responsibility. Our individual personalities end up shaping the way we do the project.
I'm sorry, but I think
And
it's a
that
bit of
comes,
a,
yes,
I think it's a bit of utopian, really, Manish, if you don't mind. I think
I love
you know,
utopias.
I mean,
I live utopias and
you
I love
are-
utopias.
the project has several, especially when you're talking about very large projects, several, stakeholders.
I know.
And they're all sort of part of the decision making and not the decision maker themselves.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're all tied up to a particular timeline, to a particular budgeting, okay, to a particular delivery schedules, right? So the point that one was making, and I understand where you're coming from, and I again say that you're very lucky to few clients like that, okay, that while you can and you must add the layers of aesthetics and others to the projects, but you have to do it very fast. You have to be master of bringing all of this together into timelines which are aligned largely. I mean, there could be some plus minuses to the original schedules and
Yeah, it's a-
timelines.
it's a
That's
huge
the limited
project
point that I was
management.
making.
Sanjay,
right?
you and I do similar projects. We've done public projects, large government scale projects, where there are multiple stakeholders. And I
I
don't,
have to ask you which comment you're talking about.
every government, I worked with multiple governments, and you know what, different governments, we work with the same government.
Sure.
We've done projects, I've done in Goa, in Himachal, in hills, over the sea, and L1 projects, lowest cost. You have to stick to the cost, you have to stick to the timelines, and there are multiple stakeholders.
Right.
But by the end of the day, it's just, and I don't think it's luck, it's how much pain you're willing to go through. How much of yourself you spend into that project is very important as an architect. You can spend yourself completely into that project, give yourself up, and yet say that it's not me who's sitting with a God complex and creating something, but it's me who's listening, hearing from everything around me and building it together.
And again, I think that's coming down to our central point, which is what we've already touched upon before, the communicating, right, with the
Absolutely.
client, the being able to give words
Yes.
to your efforts to try and design for multiple senses, right? I think it's that which is, and it's a project, as you say correctly, it's a huge project management task, unfathomable in a lot of cases for big projects. But the beauty of you being the creative minds behind this is that you have teams that are you have an organism behind you that helps you. But I think for you to, and this is the beauty of being creative, right, is you are allowed to sit there and give words to these imaginings in your head. And I think it's about being able to do that, which then solves the other issues in a way, right? Because if the client or whoever gets behind that and you're able to take them with you,
Yes.
they won't care about the time. They won't care about, they'll still care about the
Eventually
money,
they care
but they'll
about
care
it,
less
but-
about the money.
Yeah. No, you are also equally, you care about money and time, but how much are you willing to listen
Yes.
is the big question.
Exactly. I'd love to bring us back to a more
Yeah.
granular. We've been philosophizing again. I tend to do that, and I'm glad that you're all with me on that. But in a more granular kind of textural level, I would love to hear. I've got two fun questions, I guess. If you all could describe your practice in one texture, what would it be? Since we're talking about senses, in a texture.
Spice.
Nice.
We feel that, see, especially we come from India, which is a very, very diverse country. It's like all the diversity of Europe, which is fitting into one country with multiple languages, cuisines, food, thoughts, a huge income gap,
Yeah.
languages. We have a lot of things happening out there. And the challenges that we face are also extreme in the sense that, there are a lot of things which are happening parallelly.
Right.
On one side, we see the word globalization being infused. On the other side, we see the local culture also progressing at the same pace. And we probably have to synchronize ourselves to the right adaptation of both in the right measure, without getting carried away of taking one aspect too strongly, because there are good practices from all over the world, and as we can see from the Strait of Hormuz, the entire planet is connected today. So we cannot say that something is local and something is not, because the entire world has become one big city.
Yes.
And using all these parameters, as I told you, we have a huge income barrier also in the country, and we have to build and we have to design for both. So understanding on one side the essence of something, utter simplicity, and crafting of space which is for all, and having a space which is for the elite is a very different thing, and we have to design for both of them.
Right.
So that's why we cannot say that we are driven by a singular thought in our practice, and it's as diversified as spice, where it's like from bland to extreme, and both work when applied in the right context.
Thank you.
Fine linen over an old pitted stone. I believe in paradoxical coexistence somewhere, where you've got the two different worlds coming together. If the linen that represents the story of human civilization, from the cotton to the thread to the weave to the craft, it's a long story of how we evolved. Stone is a story of the planet itself. It's how timelessness, of how multiple organisms, moments, histories existed or occurred on that surface.
Right.
It has a deep down story down there. When you put these two stories together, that defines pretty much the practice. I believe in storytelling. I believe in creating multiple stories from multiple vantage points, because a design is not a single vantage point. You have to look at it from the perspective of time, context, materials, everything, and it still has to satisfy all those paradoxes together in our city today, in the world we live in. And the more paradoxes coexist together, more layered the design is. And I'm always looking for that chaos. I'm always looking for that. So these two textures coming together always, the soft and the hard, the grayness of black and white, light and shadow. I think that's very, very intriguing and important. My whole practice is defined.
I think she wanted to move away from the philosophical ones. You should take it right back. Just a light one. Absolutely. I would say my architecture is very context driven. I always look for that, right? And I believe that you're a different architect when you're designing for a client, and you are a different architect when you're designing your own home. And that's why we have homes of architects which are very, very different, because there you are the client, you writing the check, you designing it so you can do your stuff. But when you're working for a client, and especially on commercial projects, right, you have to be very mindful of the context in which that project is being conceived. The client is coming to you for a specific solution to the building, right? So I always put myself into how I'm going to use that space, okay, just to get that individual connect. But beyond that, I try to respect the context with which the client is coming, and that context is not limited only to the functional part of it. It also gets connected, depending on where your site is, to what is the regional context of the site. Is there a vernacular or a heritage layer to the project? Does that become the overarching design principle in your design? Is there a craftsmanship invested area that you're working in, and that has to take over? So we worked in areas which were very, very heritage driven, so we let that take over, okay? But there are other places which are very, very commercial driven, downtown sort of a project, okay, where the vernacular architectural layer has sort of given way, it's erased, it's become more cosmopolitan. Okay, there we let the the functional context take over, and you try to then give it a layer of aesthetics. So I would say very, very context driven architecture that
fluid
I profess.
water is the texture.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's my firm's name.
So I think being from India, there are main resource is hand, like how you craft by using. We are not very. I'm sure we are gearing up, and I think we are zooming into very technological advancement. We are trying to capture all that, but it's the beauty and the magic is the imperfection of the human hand, which India has abundance of that. You go to north, south, you have and how you can really use those textures and those materials, whether it's stone, there is wood, there's everything, because I think the material takes you into the making of it. And when you get into the making of it, it kind of connects you to time, to movement. So like it brings you back to context, it brings you back to history, like how it is made gives you a human experience. It kind of connects to, I think it becomes an emotional anchor in some way. Like whether you are in the streets of Jaisalmer or yesterday one was walking in the streets of Milan, like how the stone is getting used, is the thickness and the thinness of the stone. I think, it's taking you through periods of history. And that's something I think, at least in our practice, we try to ensure that how working by hand and how using those very basic materials and how we can craft it better, because it will anyways by default give you thermal comfort or human comfort in any case. And that's
Interestingly, the new technology is helping with the imperfections of the craftsman now, which is a great thing.
And giving them livelihood. For India, it's
the way the
supreme.
technology is fusing with craftsmanship, I think it's fantastic.
At our level, we could be doing, but like your projects and Sanjay's project, it's actually a different level.
Manish, I'm actually happy with certain imperfections when you do by hand, because that gives you a variety.
What I'm saying, technology today is actually
It's
helping
more
imperfections.
human.
It's frugal. वो जरूरी है.
Today, technology is helping those imperfections,
Yeah.
not removing them.
Not removing them. You're
That's
right.
what I'm saying. The newer technology
I get
today
you now. Yeah.
is actually leading to imperfections.
Yes.
So it's the craft and the technology which are actually merging very well together now in India.
We'll see where that journey takes us. One last question, and like a one-word answer from all of you. And I know you've seen the question, so it's again a fun one. But since we are in a room of dreams, if you could design a room of dreams with no limitations, no gravity, nothing, what would be the first element that each of you would place? And you can't say light. Light's been said too many times.
So, at least for me, room is like a refuge. It's a place of security, and you need to start dreaming. I think more than a form of the room or the function of the room, I think we go back to like finding a quiet corner, which gives you a little psychological protection and intimacy. So for me, any space one would do is creating that corner where a cocoon, and then kind of build through it. Now, whether it connects to light, it doesn't connect to light, it could be a dark space, it could be a low height space, but
Angles, I guess.
Since you give one word,
sorry.
That's why I'm like,
since you give one
angles.
word, I will stick to that. Bliss.
Okay.
Frozen time, because that pause re-kicks the moment and restarts every moment. Frozen time.
I feel immersed in nature because I am claustrophobic. So I can imagine my space which actually opens up and is very transparent to nature.
So window.
Immersive.
Nothing. Just
Bangalore, they can have
Yes.
no walls.
Thank you.
No, but you can have a lot of trees and still keep
Yeah,
the
yeah,
cover.
that's what I mean.
You're lucky to
And that's what I want.
Just too many trees there.
Exactly.
We live in a city of Delhi which is filled with pollution.
You come to Delhi.
Delhi is only smoke.
You heard the Hindi song, where he says, we've made these two lovers. They said we've made a house of our dreams. It never had the roof. We never built the walls, and the windows I didn't like. That's what.
And we only see grey skies. Whereas you're Bangalore, you only
Yeah,
see
we
like
see
beautiful
lovely,
blue sky.
we love,
Yeah, sure.
we love the nature.
Thank you so much. That was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Claire.